Thanks, Mike. I'm John Freeborn, but back in Virginia, we go by John Dave or Dave John, either one. We're interchangeable to our volunteers, and that works out good because if I have a problem, I say, well, I think you must have talked to John, not Dave.
I'm glad you said that, because that's why I didn't go by name.
And I caught a little bit of that here too, which is fun, you know. But just a little bit about kind of who we are. I wanted to show some pictures real quick from work. This is me at my desk, hanging out at the office. It's pretty clean in there. I snuck over and took a picture of Dave at his office. He was sleeping, but we sat down and this question's come up, you know, about what our responsibilities are. And you know, when you're working with the program like this, there's just no end to it. So we're always busy with Master Gardener work. And I tell my volunteers that I kind of like this guy sitting here. We're doing some important work. We're keeping this house from catching on fire, but we're trying to keep calm and we're trying to do it in a way that we don't get worn out. But sometimes we have to solve a problem, and Dave's going to tell a little story about a county in central Virginia and kind of how that problem came to be and what we did to solve it.
So today, are we John Dave or Dave John?
Dave John.
Okay, all right. Well, hidely ho there, neighborinos. Actually, I thought I was going to be Ned Flanders, not Homer, so I don't know what's up with that. Sorry if you aren't. I really apologize if you're not Simpsons fans, but anyway. So our story, and I'll try to be quick about this. We had a small, mostly rural, even though by USDA standards, it is considered an urban county, Bedford County, Virginia. Very central, a lot of traditional farming, but a pretty progressive county seat, which is called Bedford City. So they have a population of about 77,000 folks. And this is just a little infographic about the Master Gardener program that exists there. The other cool thing about the story of this is the Ag and Natural Resource agent that manages the Master Gardener program there is not a horticulture agent. He is a traditional cows and plows ag agent, and I mean that as no insult. It's just Scott is from a traditional ag background, but if you step back and look at it, I would say that he has one of the most effective programs from a managerial standpoint across the entire Commonwealth when you stack them all up against each other. But they have about 62 Master Gardeners. Last year, they contributed 6,500 volunteer hours. So that gives you an idea of the size of this Master Gardener group. So for us, this is kind of a mid to a small mid-size volunteer group within Virginia. And this sets the stage for what we're here to talk about. In 2007, and they'd been doing trainings for many, many years prior to this, but in 2007, they only had 10 people sign up for their class, and only 6 of them stayed around after they made it through the class. Scott knew that that was not a sustainable model, and next year, they did not have enough to have a class. And that, you know what that does for a program and its momentum and the morale of those that are ongoing volunteers, and we have a high percentage of long-term volunteers within many of our groups, this one included. So they missed a class, came back in 2009, had another small class, again, investment of resources for a small number of people. And then in 2010, again, they had not enough people to have a class. So very fortuitous for Scott, he had one of his trained Master Gardeners that was a retired nursing instructor that developed online courses for the nursing industry. And she sat down with Scott and came up with this idea to do some online training. They contacted the state office to make sure that was going to be copacetic with us. And in 2011, they moved to this model. They called it online, but it really wasn't. It was actually a flash drive. So the correct terminology would be an asynchronous training module, and everybody that enrolled would get a flash drive with all of the presentations preloaded and all the instructions and such. So it wasn't truly online, and I don't think it is to this day entirely for them. They have adapted some new technologies, but anyway, it was volunteer driven. There was agent oversight, so the volunteers were not necessarily steering the ship entirely. And then they did get specialists to review it. And a lot of the materials that were used were actually PowerPoint presentations that our extension specialist or agents would use when they would go out to the counties to do the training classes. So they were building on resources that were already essentially vetted within our own faculty and staff. So again, they weren't creating these rogue resources that hadn't been hadn't gone through the vetting process to some extent. And if you hear me talk about this is my soapbox, the Handson Labs. The agent had tremendous insight. The volunteer, her name is Phyllis, had tremendous insight that, yeah, it's fine and dandy that you sit down self-paced and go through these asynchronous modules and you gain information from the content, but the real learning, the solidification of that learning was happening in these hands-on labs, and we'll have more to say about that as time goes. And Phyllis also developed with a team of other volunteers that she and Scott pulled together, created some guidelines on, you know, how do you do this? Because again, if you think about our audience base, most of us are beyond the age of where the majority of our learning is either online or through asynchronous modules, particularly in our undergraduate experiences. So they are asynchronous. You have to complete the module before you can go to the lab. That is a requirement, a prerequisite, and they do have things in place to make sure that that happens. All of the material is complementary to our training manual. So we have I think it's now like a 20-chapter training manual, and all of the resources for the core topics in particular are very complementary to the content of those books. So it all kind of supports each other. They do these labs either on Thursdays or Saturdays. So again, trying to accommodate folks that either work or have other things going on in their schedules that would prohibit them from coming during the week. And they're 3 hours long. They require you to go through 5 of them to complete the training. But in most cases, all of the participants, 100% of the participants will take all 10 labs. And they have seen that to be true over the past 7 years. So for this next segment, in light of yesterday's very compelling keynote speech at the beginning of the day, for my presentation today, I'll be reading the PowerPoint slides word for word.
Thank you.
Just for you, Mike. I told somebody last night, you know, I'm not going to throw John under this bus, but I can't give a serious presentation. It's just not in my nature, so sorry. So these next several slides, they are, I will tell you, they are text dense, but these are comments and reflections from Phyllis and from Scott. So we felt like it was important that you see all of these words. So again, I do apologize that they're so text heavy. I'm not going to read them word for word, Mike, I promise you.
Thank you.
Every other word, maybe. So since they have implemented this, they have not had to cancel a class. So that's win number 1 for them. Again, if you think about it from the context of a small rural unit, missing 1 year of training can do a lot to undermine and undo the positive momentum they have built from previous years. And also for our folks, and hopefully it's the same for you, our long-term volunteers are invigorated and energized by the new blood that comes in through these training classes. So there's more to it than just having butts in seats. It's about the dynamics of the group, the evolution of the group, and the health of the group overall over time. The students do identify that those labs are essential. And when I think about, and I'll back up a second, I'm a Luddite. I've been labeled a Luddite, and I own that, that's fine. I still like learning in the traditional way of somebody standing in front, telling me information, and then I absorb it and go learn additionally on my own. The students that go through this have talked about how the labs are the essential point, and that's become my soapbox. That was my hesitation for Virginia transitioning even to a hybrid training model where some of it was online and some of it was traditional, is that social interaction to me is key. And we heard that, I think, from Samuel on the social network learning theory. That's us. You know, we learn together, and that's a critical component. So I had always been reluctant for us to transition to this, but decided to let them give it a try. The labs are the key ingredient to their success, in my opinion. And I think Scott and Phyllis and those that go through it would verify that. So the students move at their own pace, but as they complete the modules, once they've reached a certain point, and for us, it's going through the risk management training, and, you know, unit by unit determines this, they engage the volunteers in projects straight out of the gate. So again, learning going on as they are being trained through the volunteerism as well. I've already talked about this. Here's the other cool stuff. The completion rates and the retention rates are through the roof for this group. They had 1 year, I think, where they didn't have 100% completion. I think that represents probably 1 student out of the entire class. And the retention after 2 years, 81% on average. Some years it's higher, some years it's lower. So if you stack that up against national volunteer statistics, they're doing a pretty darn good job. So I mentioned on the infographic, they have about 72 active volunteers. They more than doubled their group when they transitioned to this new learning experience for their volunteers. They recognize the importance of socialization. And then from the presenter standpoint, from the instructors, from the specialists and the agents that were coming in to train, they had to totally rethink how they were doing that, because they were used to standing in front at a lecture like this at a podium, telling them information. Well, suddenly the students are coming to class with all that information already, so they were able to have much richer and much deeper conversations about what they had learned. So it reinforced what they had been doing on their own. Another cool kind of unintended consequence, they have had increased participation in leadership roles as a result of going to this asynchronous kind of hybridized model of training, which again is a great win for the local organizations, because I'm guessing that we're not any more unique than the rest of you. We have trouble with leadership and getting folks to create succession plans for leadership, and so it's helping with that for this group. And then lastly, this is why we're here, is what does this have to do with diversity? Well, they started seeing a change in the demographics of their classroom and their participants by age, by work status. Particularly, they had a lot of teachers that were starting to take the class because they could do that even if it was going on during the school year. Yeah, I'll stop with that. So 5-year average, they had a almost 96% graduation rate and 86% retention rate for 2 years or beyond for the 5-year average. So now we're going to change gears and tell a little bit different story.
So the question is, when we got all of this and saw what they were doing in this small rural county, what did we do with that? We met with them. We developed an online module team made up of the agent and volunteers and us in the state office. We went through the process of creating online modules based on the content they had already developed. And Phyllis recognized that we needed to not only give people these modules, but we got to give them the way to use them. What are the things that are key to making this work? And so we met over the course of probably 6 months and came up with policies, but also guidelines. In Virginia, we try to have as few policies as possible and as many guidelines as possible so that local folks can implement that however it works best for them. So we put together best management practices. We also created an introductory PDF so that we could see, what kind of computer do I need? What browser do I need to have? How do I access these? What do I need to think about when I'm putting together these online labs or these hands-on lab activities? What are some examples? And Mike was actually generous enough to share some of his lab examples with us. And so we share those with them so that if they're not sure how would we do a hands-on lab for turf, we have some examples and some templates that they could use. We house all of that in our volunteer management system, which is kind of a nice place to be able to put it. And we've got, you want to pull that up? Go ahead and try to pull that up. So we housed it in the VMS. And the nice thing is when we use that, we're able to add our trainees and add our interns into there so that they can access those modules. The modules, I think we moved that to the other screen, maybe.
Oh, you gotta kill that screen first. So. What'd you do? I broke it.
I think that's that Luddite thing coming out, isn't it?
You took the words right out of my mouth.
Hey, I own it.
All right, so of course I've had such a great track record here. So.
There we go. You can just bring up the module. Oh, you can't. Yeah. Anyway, so when we put them in there, they're able to access all of the different modules. They're broken into about 20-minute sections each, and we have kind of a variety of modules. This one is one that we developed, and it's actually narrated.
Welcome to the Soils Chemical Properties course. This course is based on part of Chapter 2 of the Virginia Master Gardener Training Manual.
And so they're able to go through there at their own pace. Some are narrated, some are not. Some are actually just recorded webinars, or we recorded the presenter teaching on their specific topic, because we have some interesting and unique topics there. So there's a breakdown, kind of a variety of different modules. So what did we do with that? If we want to put the presentation back up. So that's the PDF, you know, that's just tips and tricks. How do we do it? What do we need? But then after about 18 months of using these modules, we did a Qualtrics evaluation. We had about 200 people who had been through the modules, that is agents, coordinators, volunteers who were helping to run training courses, or the trainees themselves. And we did that evaluation with them. We asked them, what did they like? What did they not like? What do we need to correct? And so right now we're in the process of updating all of those modules. We're going back through, you know, there are always a few errors. There's some things that need to be changed, but we're going back and working on those. We actually found that the narrated ones, while they seem nice, people actually preferred the ones that are self-paced so they can read. It goes along with the handbook also. And then we're going to go and develop some new modules. But what we also found was that some of our existing Master Gardeners like to use those modules. They like to check them out and refresh. They're used by multiple units. Some of our units are doing this whole kind of online piece with the Handson Labs. Some of them are just using a few of the modules. If you're in the middle of nowhere and you can't get somebody to come in and present about turf, what do? You know, they were struggling to find people. Travel dollars were tight. So they'll use the turf module and go through that with their folks. So that's also a nice one. One more quick story then about how these kind of have been used. So you saw where they started. How are they used they were used in a rural setting, but out here in the Tidewater area of Virginia, this is our most densely populated area. They actually decided to go ahead and do two trainings. They did a hybrid type and a traditional type at the same time for 2 years. They wanted to compare it, offer options to people, and see what happens. So we have the traditional day course offered from 9 to 12 Tuesdays and Thursdays. The hybrid one was online learning through the modules and different methods that they had identified in 90 minutes every Wednesday night, so that they could come in and discuss, do some hands-on activities. Optional Saturday labs for folks who couldn't make that in discussion. They had 102 students in 2 years, 51 per course, so they had a very even distribution of people. What were some of the outcomes? They had a huge increase because they offered these two different options, one for folks who weren't able to make the traditional day class, one for ones that did. They had a culture adjustment, and we call that a good thing. A lot of the Extension Master Gardeners who had been there for a long while, they weren't crazy about this idea of this hybrid learning and Wednesday nights and Saturdays. We want to do it in the daytime like we always have. And good, I'm glad they're uncomfortable. Change is good, it's good for them, it's good for us. It generated a lot of excitement in the group. They got a lot of new people in there. All of the Extension Master Gardeners that are part of those units, there's actually 5 units that share that training. They all got better at using computers. They got better at using modules, accessing these things, answering questions in online formats. And they got younger folks in there, new ideas. If you get a few of the millennials or the working crowd in there, they know how to reach their peer group. Maybe we don't know how to reach their peer group, but they do. And so that helped them recruit more for the next year. Again, as Dave said, these are comments that came straight from the course evaluator. This was volunteer driven. It had agent oversight, but there was a team of volunteers who did this. They did an evaluation, and Carol is retired military, and Carol is very structured and very formal. So I put these in there because I think her words are so important. It's been very much worthwhile. It's been a lot of work, but it is exciting and definitely a deluxe program. Here's their enrollment numbers, 5151. Again, back to why we're here. 23 were minority, 8 in the day class, the traditional class, double that number in the hybrid class, 15. Working full-time or part-time, 33 total. 5 in the day class, 28 in the hybrid class. So these options give us that ability to reach those audiences that we're not reaching and train them. I think that this is one of the pieces, again, that goes back to what Dave said, and it has to do with the fact that we have to have that hands-on piece, that discussion piece, where we bring them into the fold and they're part of something much larger than just horticultural training. It's about being a volunteer and being part of a volunteer organization. Carol says that the value of the in-person learning experience is key. Of course, it's fully online without some physical classes would fail to create a Master Gardener intern who's knowledgeable and part of the program. I think that's a very powerful statement, and their research and what they've done there has borne this out. Back to Virginia. We'll take questions at the end.
Yeah, we'll take questions
That's
at the
fine.
end. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.